everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Madeline, this is Novel Inc, and today I'm going to be doing my January wrap-up. In the month of January, I started off the year strong numbers-wise. I read 17 books. Perhaps the more interesting part of that, though, is that of those 17 books, 10 were new to me, and 7 of the books that I read in January were rereads, which is a wild number for me. I think that in all of 2018, I only reread like 13 books, so this is like over half that I reread during the month of January alone, which is wild. I'm also struggling with the curse that I always struggle with at the beginning of every new reading year, where I read a lot of things that I like, but I don't read anything that I absolutely love. So hopefully that's gonna change in February. But my only 5-star reads in January were a couple of rereads, which I will talk to you about at the end of this video. However, that being said, I did read a lot of books that I really enjoyed in January, a lot of really strong 3- and 4-star books. So I'm going to talk to you about those now. I'm going to go in order of my least favorite books to my favorite books of the month. Starting off with my 2-star reads from the month of January. The first of those is actually the first book that I read in 2019, and I really thought it was going to be a winner, and it turned out to not be a winner. And that was All the Walls of Belfast by Sarah Carlson. This is a debut novel that is coming out in March, and I was so excited about it because it is set in Northern Ireland, and it follows 2 protagonists, one Catholic and one Protestant, who are kind of dealing with the aftermath of the Irish Troubles, which, if you are not familiar, was just a guerrilla war being fought between Irish and Northern Irish factions in much of the 20th century. And this kind of follows the generation after the Troubles have ended, and them trying to grow up in the aftermath of all of this, but also it also kind of tries to show how cycles can be repeated from generation to generation. I thought that this book had a really fascinating premise. The setting was great. I visited Belfast, Northern Ireland, where this book is set, a couple of years ago, and really loved it. So I really enjoyed reading a book that was set there in one of my favorite cities that I've been to, but the characters were just awful. Particularly the male main character. We get 2 POV characters, surprise surprise, they end up falling in love, etc, etc. And I just found the male POV character to be a total dickwad. Like, I empathized with him. He'd gone through a lot in his life. He had a very abusive family situation, but it's not really a good excuse to treat the people around you the way that he treated the people around him. Overall, I just was unimpressed with this book. It had so much potential, and I think the fact that I was expecting so much really factored into my disappointment with this. So overall, this was not a great way to start off the year. The second 2-star book that I read in January was a reread. If you did not know, myself and one of my very best friends, Jane from It's Jane Lindsay, are doing a year-long reread of all of Cassandra Clare's Shadowhunter Chronicles. By the time this year is over, the 2 of us will have read 20 Cassandra Clare books in 2019, which is so funny to me. But so obviously we're starting with The Mortal Instruments, which is both of our least favorite series in the Shadowhunter Chronicles, and we read City of Bones and City of Ashes this month. I gave City of Bones 2 stars. The writing, I had forgotten how bad it was in the first couple of books. City of Bones in particular, the writing just felt so forced at times and so hard to get through, and I feel like had I not already been so familiar with the Shadowhunter world, the way that it's kind of set up in City of Bones is a little bit confusing. And then City of Ashes, I ended up rating 2.5 stars because while I did not enjoy the plot of this one as much as City of Bones, because I had forgotten how strong the incest plotline was in this book. Like, it was just to the point where it was really freaking me out. The writing in City of Ashes is definitely much better than in City of Bones. So though I didn't love my reread of these first 2 Mortal Instruments books, I do truly love the Shadowhunter Chronicles unironically and with my whole heart. And I think that Cassandra Clare's writing improves so much over the course of her career, and I'm excited to continue with this reread, even though these first 2 were kind of duds upon reread. I will always have a special place in my heart for the Mortal Instruments series for introducing me to this crazy world almost 10 years ago, which it's just wild that I've been reading Cassandra Clare's Shadowhunters books for 10 years now, but here we are, and here we are. Next, I read a couple 3-star books in January. The first of those was Heroin by Mindy McGinnis. This comes out in March from HarperCollins, and it follows a high school softball player who is a star softball player on her high school's team. She ends up getting injured in a car accident, and she is prescribed OxyContin for pain and ends up kind of spiraling into opioid addiction. And this book examines the opioid crisis and the reality of it. It was a really difficult read. If you are a recovered or recovering addict, I would highly advise you to stay far away from this book because the descriptions of drug use are very vivid and very detailed. I have a full review going up on my blog soon that has like full content warnings. Feel free to message me if you want those content warnings before my review goes up. I would be happy to give them to you because there are quite a lot for this book. But I felt that it did a good job at examining this issue in a very nuanced way. However, I didn't really feel a true connection to the main character because the story kicks off and almost immediately the main character gets into the car accident, so we don't really get to know her as a person before her struggles with addiction began, which kind of impaired my ability to connect with her as a character. However, like I say, I do think that this was a well done portrayal. It was not a fun read, it was not a hopeful read, it was not an uplifting read, but I think it's important and I'm glad that it exists, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. Then I read Meet Me in Outer Space by Melinda Grace. This also comes out in March, also on March 12th. This one is coming out from Macmillan's Spoon Reads imprint though, and I enjoyed this. I really don't have any issues with this book whatsoever. One thing that I really liked was that the main character has a learning disability. She has central auditory processing disorder, and that representation is own voices, which is wonderful. I'm so glad that books about learning disabilities are being published, especially own voices stories. And the romance was super cute. However, I ended up just giving this 3 stars because not a lot happened and it's very straightforward. You get what you expect with this book. It's just a cute romance. There's really not a whole lot more to it than that, but nonetheless, I still enjoyed it. And lastly, in my 3-star reads is one that I'm a little nervous to talk about, but I'm going to anyway. It was Again But Better by Christine Riccio. I buddy read this with my dear friend Melanie from Mel to the Any, and was very thankful that the two of us had quite similar thoughts on this one. We both ended up rating it 3 stars. And I think that Christine's writing in Again But Better is actually really great. It's very genuine, very earnest, very heartfelt, which I appreciated. And you see a lot of her shining through in the writing. I think that like the quality of the writing I had no issue with. I thought it was engaging, I thought it was fun, and I thought it was a strong debut. My main issue with this book was that pretty much the entire romantic plot contains like gray area emotional cheating, and I just can't get on board with that. It's just not a romance that I can support. Yeah, I don't know, and just some of the main character's actions in regards to her love interest really made me uncomfortable. That was just my main issue with this book, and I really couldn't get past it. I know Melanie felt the same way as well. Also, the two of us have both mentioned this, but there is so much of Christine in this book. It's almost impossible to imagine the main character as anyone but Christine because she in so many ways feels like Christine. She has a blog called like French Watermelon, like Poland Bananas, and everything about it was just, it kind of felt invasive to read it almost because it felt like I was reading something very personal, and I don't know how much of Christine's own self she put into this main character Shane, but it really on a surface level felt a little too intimate, to the point where Melanie and I were both a little bit uncomfortable and felt like we were like invading Christine's like personal life by just reading this book, which is ridiculous because, you know, Christine wrote it and she's publishing it and, you know, etc etc. But it was just a very weird sensation as a reader. Like I say, I don't think this is a bad book. I think this is one that a lot of people are going to really enjoy. I think this is one that a lot of other people are going to really not enjoy. For me, I kind of just fell in the middle of the road, but I'm very happy for Christine, and you know, just really excited to see booktubers getting published, especially in the contemporary genre, but this story was just not a perfect fit for me. I ended up giving it 3 stars. I had one 3.5-star book in January, and that was In an Absent Dream by Seanan McGuire. This is the 4th companion novel in the Wayward Children series, and in this story we're following Lundy, who's a character that we've gotten to know in previous installments in this series. As I mentioned, they are all companion novels. You don't have to read them in order. I would at least read Every Heart a Doorway before reading In an Absent Dream, just because you will be familiar with Lundy as a character, but this follows her story and the portal world which she entered as a child. And for me, I love the writing in this series. I just love the way that Sean McGuire chooses to tell these stories, and I find myself always on my Kindle highlighting so many passages in these books. However, Lundy's like world just didn't excite me too much. It's a goblin market, and as someone who's not a huge fan of like retellings or fantasy world, it just felt a little too fantastical for me, and just like I say, it wasn't my favorite, but the writing was just as incredible as the rest of the Wayward Children series, and I think that if this is a world and a premise that intrigues you, you will definitely still really enjoy this, and I definitely recommend picking it up. I had a couple of 4-star books during the month of January. The first of those was You Asked for Perfect by Laura Silverman. This is a YA contemporary coming out in March. It is Laura Silverman's sophomore novel, and it follows a main character who is at the top of his class. He is applying to Harvard, and he is starting to crack under all of the pressure of his senior year of high school. While I appreciated this book a whole bunch, I can't say that I enjoyed reading it, because I truly have never been as stressed reading a book as I was while reading this. It just brought back all of the very worst parts of high school, and high school is like 5 years behind me now, but it brought back some very visceral memories that I didn't really ever need brought back. So like I say, I think this is an excellent portrayal of that time in a lot of people's lives, and I think a lot of people in the book community are gonna resonate with this story a lot like I did, because so many of us were probably that kind of overachieving student in high school. Like I say, super stressful reading experience, but it also had like a really cute male-male romance, and it was very true to life, and it had some really awesome friendships. It was set in a suburb of Atlanta, so it had a lot of good things going for it. It just really stressed me out to read it. However, still give it 4 stars, would still recommend it. Oh, and I buddy read that one with my friend Olivia from Books and Big Ideas. My next 4-star book in January was one of the first books I read this year, and that was The Lying Woods by Ashley Elston. My friend Jane gifted me a copy of this for Christmas because she loves Ashley Elston's books. I had heard great things about Ashley Elston from Jane, Kristen from Super Space Chick, and Alexa from Alexa Loves Books, so I was kind of itching to pick up one of her books early on in 2019, and I'm very happy that I did. This is a young adult contemporary with mystery elements. It follows a high school student whose father has just been discovered to have been like stealing a ton of money from the company that he owned, and this company created the majority of the jobs in our main character's hometown, and so our main character is forced to drop out of his fancy private school because it's being paid for with his dad's stolen money, and he has to move back to his hometown where everyone has put a target on his family's back, because his father is the reason that everyone in this town has like lost their jobs and their livelihoods. So our main character Owen is kind of just trying to figure out what happened. He feels like there's more to the story, so he starts to investigate and try to figure out what's really going on. I super enjoyed this. This is, I've heard, the more like contemporary of Ashley Elston's books. One thing I really appreciated about this book was the portrayal of life in the rural South, because I grew up in a very rural southern town, and I thought it was very true to life. Overall, I really enjoyed the experience of reading this, and there were a lot of twists and turns I didn't expect. I will definitely give Ashley Elston props for taking me on a wild ride. I am a reader who typically can predict a lot of twists and turns in a mystery or a thriller plot, but this one kept me guessing from start to finish, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading it, and can't wait to pick up more of Ashley Elston's work in the future. My last 4-star read of the month was a super short erotica novella. I don't know how our conversation turned to this, but one night at ALA, myself, Jane, and Chelsea from Chelsea Darling Reads were all discussing Dahlia Adler's books, and Jane out of nowhere was just like, have you guys read her adult threesome erotica novellas? And the two of us were like, no. Chelsea and I both immediately bought them on Amazon and read them pretty soon after that. Editor's note was exactly what I expected it to be. It's just 3 people banging. That's all it is, folks. But it was great. It was really well written, and I enjoyed it. I don't really have anything more to say on that one. Okay, we're coming toward the end, folks. I had a couple of 4.5-star reads in January. The first of those was The Wicker King by Kay Ancrum. I read this as part of the Dragons and Tea book club. January was the inaugural month of the Dragons and Tea book club, which is a Goodreads book club hosted by Melanie from Mel to the Any and Amy from A Court of Crowns and Quills. I really enjoyed being part of it. I try to support my friends when they do book clubs like this when I can, and I'm really happy that I chose to pick up The Wicker King with the Dragons and Tea book club, because this is a book that I definitely can say I would not have picked up if it weren't for this book club. I ended up loving this. I don't really want to say too much about the plot because I went in blind to this, and I think that that's probably the best way to go in, but it is queer. It has a great depiction of mental illness, and overall just super atmospheric, super immersive. The chapters are really short, which is a story format that always tends to suck me in and keep me reading. Overall, this was just so well done, and it was so not what I expected. I ended up loving it, and it was great. I'm so glad I read it. My favorite book of the month that was not a reread, my last 4.5-star book of January, was Night Music by Jen Marie Thorne. I picked up this arc at ALA Midwinter this year, and this was actually the first arc from my ALA Midwinter haul that I decided to read. I started it on the plane on my way home from Seattle, and I couldn't have picked a better place to start, honestly. This was one of my most anticipated books of the year. I was very, very excited to pick up a copy at ALA, and it did not disappoint me. Night Music follows two classical musicians living in New York City during this like summer music program. Our main character Ruby is the daughter of a world famous conductor and composer, and she has begun to fall out of love a bit with the classical music world. She's a pianist, and playing piano has been a huge part of her life for so long, but she's starting to feel a little bit eclipsed by her dad's shadow and her last name, so she decides to step away from classical music for a while. And then our other main character, her love interest, is a boy named Oscar, who is this like child prodigy of a composer and conductor who had a YouTube video that went viral of him conducting an arrangement of some pop music, and it has kind of put him on the classical music world's map. And it's about him being this rising star in the classical music scene, and how the people in charge in this classical music world are kind of using him as a pawn. I studied music in school, and classical music is a huge part of my life, and it was a world that I lived in for so long. And I think that I really needed to read this story, because ever since I finished school, I've been feeling very disconnected from this world and this part of my life that just was such a big part of me for so much of my life. And I think that I needed to mourn that a little bit. Wow, I'm getting a little more personal than I expected to, but I thought that Ruby's experience with this was very true to my own experience, and reading this story was really cathartic for me, and I'm, like I say, really happy I picked this up. The romance was also super cute. The New York City setting was very well done, but the thing that really shines through for me about this book was the portrayal of the classical music world in general, and all of the good and bad parts of it. Yeah, it was great. 10 out of 10, would recommend. The last books that I read in January were the original Grisha Trilogy by Leigh Bardugo and the Six of Crows duology, also by Leigh Bardugo. I reread all of these in preparation for King of Scars, which came out at the end of January. That will be in my February wrap-up, don't you worry. But yes, so I read the original Grisha Trilogy, Shadow and Bone, Siege and Storm, and Ruin and Rising. I have the last two books loaned out to my friend right now, but I ended up giving Shadow and Bone 3 stars, Siege and Storm 4 stars, and Ruin and Rising 3 stars. I hadn't read this trilogy since it originally came out, so it's definitely been a while, and I had so much fun being back in this world. You know, I think that Shadow and Bone reads very much like a YA fantasy published in the year 2012, but I still had a great time reading it. I'm probably like the 17th person in your subscription feed that you've seen talk about a Grisha reread in January, so I feel like I don't need to go into too much detail. But for me, the standout of this series is definitely Siege and Storm. I think that's an awesome sequel. The action keeps you turning the pages from start to finish. We meet Nikolai for the first time, who's one of my favorite characters, and yeah, overall this was a fun time. I still don't like Mal. I feel like there's been a lot of like people saying that they suddenly like Mal, whereas like in 2014 we all hated him. I'm still not his biggest fan. I personally am team Alina should have been single, but that's just me. Anyway, Grisha Trilogy reread. It was not anything special, not anything to write home about, but it was still really fun. Also, I forgot that I really low-key love Alina. I feel like I've heard a lot of people in their reviews of this say that she's kind of a Mary Sue and that she's boring, but I found her really witty and funny, and maybe I did reread these on audio this time around, so maybe it was just the audio narrator playing her in a way that I found really endearing, but I had a lot of love for Alina upon this reread. Also, the audiobooks were great. I really enjoyed the narrator. And then, of course, I reread the masterpiece that is The Six of Crows duology by Leigh Bardugo. Also, I just went to the King of Scars tour, and now my first edition Six of Crows is signed by Leigh Bardugo, which is very cool. I don't know what to say about this duology that hasn't already been said, and in fact, I probably have already said a lot about this duology. I think that these two books are a dang masterpiece of a series. Everything about the Six of Crows duology just hits the ball out of the park for me. The plot, the pacing, the setting, the characters, everything is just so good, and I have nothing bad to say about these books. And Nina is my favorite character. She's one of my favorite fictional characters of all time ever. 10 out of 10, would date her. Thank you so much, goodbye. Also, I rated both of these 5 stars. These are my favorite reads of the month, even though they were rereads. I just love them. And with that, we have finally reached the end of all the books I read during the month of January. Definitely let me know in the comments if you read any of these during the month of January, or if you've read them in general and what you thought of them. I would love to discuss. As always, all my social media links will be down below so that we can be friends, and if you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel so that you don't miss out on new content from me. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and I will see you soon in another one. Bye!